Howdy everyone, John with iTap here again, and got another little beer to talk about with you. We are headed back to Belgium. Another one of my favorite beers of all time, and another one of the great beers made in pretty much on planet Earth. That would be the wonderful Duvel. They call it a Belgian Golden Ale, Belgian Strong Golden Ale, Belgian Strong Pale Ale, whatever you want to call it. This is one of those great classic Belgian beers. And one of the beautiful things about it is if you do any research on it or look up how it's brewed, there's not a whole lot to the recipe. It's just sort of how well the beer is treated, and we can get into that here in a second. But let's go ahead and pour this. It's going to be a little, show you how it's unique pretty much right off the bat. So I know sometimes you pour this for customers and they say, hey, there's too much head in it and whatnot. But this is actually how the beer is supposed to be poured. Kind of get it right up to the label here on the Duvel glass. So the glass is huge. That's to accommodate for the amount of carbonation that's in the beer. What that is so, normally when you have a beer, they measure a level of carbonation in the beer in what's called volumes of CO2. And standard volumes of CO2 is like 2.5 to 2.6. We're probably 95 plus percent of the beers that you drink. Duvel is over 4. That's because it's because of the fermentation process that they use. And get into that in a second. But yeah, it's a really heavily carbonated beer. It's actually why they have this sort of squatty bottle. It's got a little more strength to it. You put this in a bottle that you would say, you put a normal beer in a long neck, and the cap would probably bust off or the bottle would crack. The bottle would essentially fail because there's so much pressure from all that carbonation. So this beer pours a really nice, just sort of clear straw. Just kind of looks like a heavier Pilsner, which is kind of essentially what this beer is. There's really not a whole lot in this beer as far as ingredients are concerned. It's basically mostly Pilsner malt. Going to be 1 or 2 hops, something like a Satz hop from the Czech Republic or Styrian Goldings, which is kind of like Germany, Austria. Not super high character hops, those sort of floral, spicy, hops that have a little bit of green character to it. What I notice on this is when you smell it is you get a really good sort of little white pepper. I get a little like green apple skin, and the beer is very sharp, very dry. You get that pepper, get a little bit of that apple, get a really pleasant bitterness, and the beer finish is extraordinarily clean, and there's a really pleasant sort of bite from the alcohol. This beer is 8.5%. You might see this on draft every once in a while, but just a heads up, that's going to be Duvel single. There are a few instances of normal Duvel being served on draft, but that's extraordinarily rare. You don't see that too often. And the reason the Duvel on draft is different, it's like 6.7% alcohol, is because of the fermentation process that this beer goes through, which creates a lot more alcohol. So it's initially fermented at a standard ale temperature, and in the 60s-ish, and then they bump it up to 70, 80 degrees to really get that yeast working and get those esters going, and gives you like that green apple and that sort of pepper note you get on there. But then they crash the beer for 3 weeks at essentially lager temperatures. So what that does is that really cleans it up and gives it sort of that Pilsner look to it, and that's a really clean finish. And then it's re-fermented in the bottle, which is where that carbonation really builds up. So yeah, which is why this is just a super heavily carbonated beer. And there's another thing in this beer too, and you wouldn't think it. It's fun to learn that a lot of Belgian beer, specifically this one, use a considerable amount of sugar in the beer, and you're going to say, why does that make the beer sweet? It's actually, sugar is to lessen the body while ramping up the alcohol. So normally if you're making a beer, think about it this way: you have you add your barley that you need to convert from a starch into a sugar, and so the yeast can eat the sugar and create alcohol, so create beer. but that's going to, there's a lot of sugars that are left over that the yeast necessarily doesn't eat. A lot of other solid materials that's going to give beer its body, things we call residual sugars that gives that sort of nice sweet mouthfeel. When you add the specific kind of sugar that the yeast likes to eat, the yeast is going to eat all of that sugar and leave absolutely nothing behind. So in a sense, it kind of sounds counterintuitive, but in the brewing process, you add sugar to dry out the beer, which is another reason this beer has such a great dry character, is the large amounts of sugar that's in it. And you would really be surprised at the number of classically made, not just Belgian beers, but like English pale ales as well, that have a considerable amount of sugar in it, which is sort of used to adjust the body on the beer. So cheers, Prost. If you haven't had this beer in a while, I recommend you hit up one of the iTaps and get yourself to the cooler and grab one, because this is one of the classic beers on the planet. Cheers.